Today we are going to discuss the political history of early medieval India. Now, as you know, early medieval India is characterized by regionalism, and what we find is that during this period we have multiplicity of powers, and all these powers were rooted to their own regions. And the situation happened in such a way that after the political disintegration of the Gupta Empire in the north and the passing away of the Vakatakas in the Deccan, a number of ruling houses came into the limelight. And these ruling houses became very important in North India as well as in South India. South India, the situation was a little different, but in North India, what we find is that the entire political history was revolving around certain major power formations, and these power formations were very important. And there was contestation over certain prize areas, and this contestation led to the rivalry between two or three very important powers. The power in the North India will be the Gurjara Pratiharas, the Palas, and their contemporary powers. And for South India, our focus of attention will be the Cholas, along with the Chalukyas, the Pallavas, the Cheras, and the Pandyas. At the turn of the 7th century, what we find is that North India did not have a major power to reckon with, and which had the prowess of the Gupta Empire.
Excuse me, ma'am, who were the major feudatories of this Gupta Empire?
I'm coming to that. Actually, what happened is when the disintegration of the Gupta Empire was taking place, we find that the Guptas were ruling in the heartland, that is the Ganga Valley, but there were certain feudatories who were ruling in different pockets of North India. We find that while Magadha, that was the center of power, the Magadha and also possibly Malwa came under the possession of the later Guptas. In the Ganga Yamuna Doab, the Mokharis became very important, and in the upper Ganga Valley, it was the Pushyabhutis who actually came to power and the through of the Gupta yoke. The Maitrakas made their presence felt in the Gujarat region and some parts of Malwa. And if we go to eastern India, what we find is that for the first time, Bengal becomes important, and Shashanka, the ruler of Gora, he marks his presence in the politics of North India. Further east, we have the Varman rulers in the upper Brahmaputra valley, and the major pattern of political activities lay in the shift of the capital from Pataliputra to Kannauj in the Doab. And it is interesting that these were actually major power formations. For example, at one side we have the Pushyavati and the Mokhari alliance, and on the other side we have the Gaura-Malava alliance. And apart from these alliances, we find that Harshavardhan of the Pushyavati family, who then got the throne of Kannauj also, became very powerful, and he emerged as an important power of North India.
Ma'am, then in this way, did Harshavardhan become the Lord of North India?
Actually, what happens is that if you look at the historiography of this period, we find that the nationalist historians, they were actually very much keen to designate Harsha as the Lord of North India. The term used is Shakolo Uttarapathonatho, because this term has been found in inscriptions of the Chalukyas. And we know that there was a struggle between the Chalukya ruler Pulakeshin and Harshavardhan, where Harshavardhan was defeated by Pulakeshin. And so naturally it was a pride for the Chalukyas that in their inscriptions they designated Harsha as the Lord of North India. But if we go by the sources, for example, we have a very important source like Swansang. We find that when he writes of the different territories, there were certain areas which were not in North India, which were not within the realm of Harsha. But definitely we must say that Harsha was very important power of that period, and he had some kind of control over other powers. In the Deccan, if we go, then we find that the Vakatakas gave way to the Chalukyas with a base in Badami, and for 300 years we find that Deccanese politics was dominated by the Chalukyas, the Pallavas, and to some extent the Pandyas. And the whole pattern of struggle, there was a conflict between powers in the Transvindhyan region, or further south, it was a conflict between the powers who ruled in the north of the Tungabhadra or the south of the Tungabhadra. And another very important area of contention was Malwa. Each power wanted to have some kind of stake in Malwa. This was because Malwa was a corridor from where one could come down southwards and also could go northwards. And Malwa was very rich minerally also. it had a very strong economic resource base. And here I would like to mention that whenever we are studying political history, it is very important that sometimes we find that political history is very much related with the economic history, and the economic importance of a region actually leads the rulers to go and grab a particular region. During this period, the focus in the Ganga plains shifted from Pataliputra to Kannauj.
So, ma'am, why did Kannauj become so important?
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question. Kannauj became very important because of the location. It was located in the Ganga Yamuna Doab region, and it was well connected with northwest, with south, and with eastern India. So the connectivity of the region and the rich agrarian resource base, these two things helped in the rise of Kannauj. And when Harsha became the ruler of Kannauj in the earlier part, we find that he already made Kannauj a symbol of royal power. So therefore there was this contestation for Kannauj as an important power base for all the powers. What happened is that around during the period around the 8th century till 1200, we find that there was contestation, as I mentioned, contestation for Kannauj. And interestingly, we find that a power from the Deccan is also playing an important role in this contestation. So the three powers that were important were the Palas of Bengal, the Gurjara Pratiharas of North India, and the Rashtrakutas of the Deccan, who actually made their foray into the politics of North India to have Kannauj within their purview. And this struggle between these three powers has been designated in Indian history as the tripartite struggle.
So, ma'am, what happened to the other regions of North India?
If we go upwards, we find that Kashmir was also emerging as an important regional power during this period. Around 8th century, it was the Karkota dynasty under the leadership of Lalitaditya who became very important. So they were controlling the Kashmir valley, they were trying to control the Ganga Yamuna Doab, and then they moved forward towards the Punjab plains. Now from Kashmir, if we just think of the map of the subcontinent, if we moved further west, we find that this period is marked by the Arab conquest of Sindh, and the Arabs actually controlled the Sindh area, and this is described in a text known as Chachnama. There was the Kabul Valley and the Gandhara, which was ruled by a Turkish family known as the Shahiyas in the early 9th century. Then this state became a buffer between North India and Afghanistan, and later on we find a Hindu Shahi ruler, his name is Jayapala. He consolidated the kingdom and made himself the master of the Punjab plains. Further east we come to Kamrupa, where we find that the Varman dynasty became very famous. And in the Varman dynasty, we have a ruler, particularly Bhaskar Varman, who made a niche for himself in the political alliances of this period, and he formed an alliance with Harshavardhan of Kannauj.
Ma'am, then why did the ruler of Kamrupa want to form an alliance with Harshavardhan?
The reason behind this is that, as I mentioned earlier, that there were major political formations. So one political formation was the Gaura-Malava alliance, the another was the Mokhari and the later Gupta alliance, Pushyabhuti alliance. Now the Mokharis were not anymore in the scene because we find that Harsha had taken over this region. Gauras were traditional enemy of the Kamrupa rulers. So naturally, Bhaskar Varman thought it very prudent to have an alliance with Harshavardhan, who was an important ruler at that time, to avoid the brunt of the Gaura ruler Shoshanko. So this was the kind of mindset that helped in the making of the alliances. The Gurjara Pratiharas, who were the major important power of North India, were known also as Pratiharas and were one of the mightiest political power. Several houses of the Gurjaras generally thought to be of indigenous origin, and then they were gradually absorbed into the Indian society, and we have their inscriptions.
Ma'am, does this dynasty have any original myth of origin attached to it?
Yeah, they now claim their origin from the Surya Vangsha, and they feel that they were in the inscriptions of the Gurjaras. It is said that they were emanated from Shaumitri. And who is Shaumitri? Shaumitri is actually the other name of Lakshmana, because he was the son of Shumitra, as you all know. So the Gurjar Pratiharas wanted to make themselves important as a ruler and had to be content with the origin myth, where they show that they belonged actually to the Shurja Bangsha. Now, coming back again to the struggle, we find that the Gurjar Pratiharas emerged as an important power, but it was the Rashtrakutas who actually performed a ceremony known as the Hiranyagarbha ceremony. They conquered the area of Ujjaini in Malwa and they performed a Hiranyagarbha ceremony where a defeated Gurjara king was kept as a Pratihara. Pratihara means a doorkeeper, and since a defeated Gurjara king was kept as a Pratihara, so the title Pratihara has been attached to their name. This we find from the Rashtrakuta records. But the other origin myth which I told you, that was from the Gurjara Pratihara records. Now regarding the struggle, Kannauj became very important, as I have mentioned earlier, and the Rashtrakutas, when they saw that Gurjaras were controlling Kannauj, they remembered their old rivalry and they immediately crossed the Vindhya and then went to fight with the Gurjara Pratiharas. This was a disaster for the Gurjara Pratiharas. The Gurjara Pratihara Raja king, who was known as Vatsha Raja, he was totally defeated, and in the inscriptions of the Rashtrakutas we find that he left away, he fled in the trackless deserts of Rajasthan. Taking this opportunity, the Pala ruler, Dharmapala, he was at that time wanting to make himself prominent in the North Indian politics. So he too wanted to control Kannauj and had this western gaze. So he immediately barged in the situation, and so there was this conflict between the Palas and the Gurjara Pratiharas, where the Rashtrakuta ruler Dhruva, he also had a role to play. Ultimately, the protege of the Gurjara Pratiharas, Indrayudha, was defeated by Dharmapala and also by the Rashtrakutas. What Dharmapala did was that after defeat of Indrayudha, he set his own protege Chakrayudha on the throne of Kannauj. These Ayudhas were the local rulers. And then he organized a grand ceremony where he invited different rulers from other regions to that ceremony to show off power of Dharmapala himself. Now there is a different kind of opinion regarding this tripartite struggle. Scholars like D.C. Sharkar, he feels that we should not give this nomenclature tripartite because here the Ayudha family is also involved. So we have the Ayudha rulers of Kannauj who are the local rulers. So immediately when we have the Ayudha rulers, it becomes a conflict between the four parties. So he says that it is not a tripartite struggle. On the other hand, the conflict between the Palas and the Gurjara Pratiharas, he looks at it as an old conflict which the Goras had with the rulers of Kannauj from the earlier times, and he calls it a Goro-Kannukubja struggle. So this is how historians look at a particular event. But normally it is common to say that this struggle was between three powers, the Gurjara Pratiharas, the Palas and the Rashtrakutas. Dharmapala's son Devpal, he also got involved in this struggle. Then again the Gurjara Pratihara kings like Nagabhatta II, later on Mihira Bhoja, they also got involved in the struggle, and there was always this one party being defeated by the other, and the Rashtrakutas' role was very important. They were emerging successful, but because of the place where they were living, so they had to cross the Vindhyas and move to their own territory, so they could not actually sit there. So what happened is that they went for a raid, came back, and then this was taken advantage of by the other rulers. For a large period, we find then we do not hear anything of the Palas or the Pratiharas fighting there, and we have Mihira Bhoja, the Pratihara ruler. He was actually the most important Pratihara ruler who was ruling in this region of Kannauj. As for the Rashtrakutas, we have the important rulers like Dhruva, Govinda III, and then Amogavarsha in the 9th century. And Amogavarsha's Sanjan copper plate is very important. It is the very important source for understanding this whole struggle. And later on, Krishna III in the 10th century stabilized the kingdom despite internal problems and additional ambition of capturing Kannauj. The Rashtrakuta Pratihara rivalry also had its contention, had its root in the contention over occupying Malwa. I mentioned that Malwa was very important. So because it was a corridor. When the Gurjaras occupied Kannauj, they naturally lost no time and there was this struggle. The Gurjara Pratiharas, the Rashtrakutas and the Palas, they actually, which is very significant, that the decline happened more or less in the same time. The Gurjara Pratihara powers gave way to the Gahadwalas in the Kannauj region. They were local powers but having a strong base in Kannauj. The Palas gave way to the Shenas and the Rashtrakutas gave way to the Western Chalukyas, who were also known as the Kalyani Chalukyas. The reason behind this disintegration of these three major powers were that because they were all motivated by the same kind of military prowess, same kind of resources. And when these resources began to crumble and when the feudatories began to rise, so naturally these powers did not last long. Now let us go to the south of the subcontinent. After the decline of the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan, the attention moved to farther south, and it was the Chola power who became very important during this period. The first important Chola ruler was Parantaka first. And before I go to the details of the political history of the Cholas, let me first give you an idea of the realm of the Cholas. The core territory of the Cholas were in Cholamandalam. Cholamandalam is associated with the present Tanjavur region in the Kaveri Delta. And this Coromandel, this was actually within the territory of the Cholas. The region to the north of this Cholamandalam was Tondai Mandalam, where the Pallavas were ruling, present-day Tamil Nadu. It was between the rivers Vellar and Pennar. And in the south, the Pandyas were having their foothold in the Vaigai Tamraparni Valley. The Cheras were ruling in Kerala region. So this was the different riverbeds and different areas where the politics of South India revolved. Now Parantaka asserted himself as an important ruler around early 10th century, but it was after Parantaka we find Rajaraja first and then his son Rajendra first, and who actually became very important powers in the Chola realm and had a very strong aggressive design for continuous aggression into the territories of the other regions. Rajaraja first, when he ascended the throne, he had conflicts with the Chera rulers, he had conflicts with the Pandyas, and these Pandyas were friendly with the Sri Lankans, and then he sent his navy to the northern portion of Sri Lanka, which is known as Ilam. And the capital city of Sri Lanka, Anuradhapura, was devastated and the capital was changed to another place known as Polonnaruwa.
So ma'am, what are the sources of this information?
There are twofold. We have the Chola inscriptions themselves. The Cholas were very particular about writing inscription. We have numerous Chola inscriptions. So these were there, and we have certain texts like chronicles, Sri Lankan chronicles, Ceylonese, which is known as the Ceylonese chronicles, like the Dipavangsha and the Mahavangsha, which talks about the devastation by the Cholas. When Rajendra Chola ascended the throne, he also, like his father, moved into, because his father had controlled only the northern portion of Sri Lanka, and now Rajendra Chola sent his fleet so that the entire Ilamandalam, which was the known as Sri Lanka, could be incorporated within the Chola realm. We have a very important source, as I mentioned, the Mahavangsha, who talks about the devastation made by the Cholas during in Sri Lanka. Another expedition of the Cholas, which is also very important and which shows that they were trying to show their prowess, was the expedition to the north. Eastern Chalukyas were important during this time, and the Cholas had constantly a strife between the Eastern Chalukyas, and they wanted to control this region. And when the Cholas wanted to control the Eastern Chalukyas, the power in the other part of Karnataka, the Western Chalukyas, they also had designs on the Eastern Chalukyas. So there was this strife to control the Vengi region, because this was also very important economically. Now, as the Cholas moved into the Kalinga region, the Vengi region, then we find from their inscriptions that they moved further north, came to the regions, some regions of Bengal. For example, they mention Vangaladesha, which is present day southeastern Bengal. Then they mention Tondobhukti, that is present day Datun in the Midnapur region. And it is mentioned in the Chola inscriptions that they made this campaign to get the Ganges water, to purify their territory, Gangaikonda Cholapuram, and so they wanted to bring the holy water of the Ganges. And Rajendra Chola, he took the epithet Gangaikonda, the conqueror of the Ganges, but there was no annexation as such. It was simple raid. Rajendra Chola, he sent in 1025 AD, he sent a fleet of Chola navy, and even Chola army was involved in this expedition. The fleet went to the kingdom of Srivijaya, and this campaign is known in history as the Kadaram campaign. There was fierce struggle between the ruler of Srivijaya and the ruler of the Cholas. Now, regarding the background of this, in case of Srivijaya, there was no annexation. It was sheer a type of raid. And Nilakanta Shastri, a very important personality or historian who wrote on the Cholas, his famous book, The Cholas, he writes that the Bay of Bengal was turned into a Chola lake. Now, why did the Cholas went overseas? It has been looked at by some historians that it was the desire for an overseas empire which led into this expedition. Another historian, like George Spencer, he talks about the politics of plunder of the Cholas.
Could you please elaborate on the plunder of politics part?
Yeah, sure. The politics of plunder, according to George Spencer, is that the Cholas at that time were not very economically powerful. The raid against the countries of Southeast Asia was actually a plunder politics. They went, they just had some raids, they brought things from there, and they replenished their treasury. The term used by him is politics of plunder. Some feels that there might be a kind of idea of colonization, but the real answer to this theories is that whatever sources we have with us, we cannot say that there was a kind of desire for an overseas empire or a kind of politics of plunder. Rather, historians believe that this was a kind of mercantile expeditions. The overseas market was very good, and we know that at that time India and China was having a very important trade network. The Bay of Bengal trade network was very active. Chola merchants were very active. They were having their guilds in different regions of Southeast Asia. Srivijaya wanted to take part in this entire commercial network, and this desire of Srivijaya to take a part in this commercial network between India and China perhaps led to this campaign against Southeast Asia. So there should not be any kind of speculations regarding Chola colony or anything other. After Rajendra Chola, what we find is that the successors of Rajendra Chola, they now shifted their focus to the internal part of the regions rather than the Southeast Asia or the Bay of Bengal network. And so the conflict with the Western Chalukyas and the Pandyas, this conflicts actually became very important at this point of time. The region to the powers to the north of the Tungabhadra, powers to the south of the Tungabhadra, this whole conflict regarding the control of Tungabhadra region, the control of the Raichur Doab became very important. And with this was the control of Vengi, the Eastern Chalukya domain. The Cholas finally could get Eastern Chalukya with themselves through matrimonial alliances, and one of the Chola rulers was Kulatunga first, who was actually a scion of the Eastern Chalukya domain. When Kulatunga became the ruler, he also had an eye for the sea. So he converted the port name. Vishakhapatnam port became very important during his time, and at one point we find that the name of Vishakhapatnam became Kulatunga Cholapattanam. This was a trend in the Chola history. We find that Raja Rajendra, they all gave their names to when they establish a township or establish an urban center or a temple, they use their name. This is a kind of projection of their power by giving the name to a temple or by giving a name to a particular urban centers. Finally, in the 13th century, Chola power declined, and we have three important powers: the Yadavas of Devagiri, the Kakatiyas of Warangal, and the Hoysalas in southern Karnataka, who become very important. These powers were originally the feudatories of the Western Chalukyas. So finally, when we look at the political scenario, we find that there was multiplicity of powers, each power vying with each other for a particular region, and this contestation was also guided by economic importance of the region.